Well, hi everyone. Some people may be trickling in, but we're going to get started. Thanks so much for being here this late afternoon, early evening. I'm Melanie Walsh, and I'm an assistant professor in the Information School here at the University of Washington. I'm one of the co-leads on the AI, Creativity, and the Humanities Cross-Disciplinary Research Cluster, which has organized this event. And I'm also going to be introducing the event and speakers and moderating the conversation. Before I talk about the motivation for this roundtable today, I want to acknowledge the land we're gathered on. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this borrowed land on which we stand, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. So over the past year, with generous support from the Simpson Center for the Humanities and with my research cluster collaborators Anna Preuss, Rich Watts, and Jeff Turnovsky, we've hosted various talks, workshops, and seminars on how AI technologies are impacting creativity in the humanities. This is our culminating event of the year, and frankly, this is the event that I've been looking forward to the most, because this is the conversation that I both care about the most and feel the most confused and conflicted about. While AI technologies are poised to transform countless disciplines and domains, AI's impact on art, literature, music, photography, film, as well as artists, writers, musicians, and creators more broadly, has received especially high-profile attention. Art and creativity are core elements of our humanity, and often of our individual identities. And so their co-option by machines is attention-grabbing. To some, this is spectacular and inspiring. To others, this is threatening, depressing, even violating. But the other big reason that AI art has made headlines is because of copyright. AI models like ChatGPT, Midjourney, and Gemini are trained on vast amounts of data, text and images, and increasingly audio files and videos. And most of this data has been scraped from the internet without users' knowledge or consent, and without attribution or compensation. AI companies' use or potential misuse of copyrighted material has prompted an intense backlash, as well as more than a dozen lawsuits, including the prominent class action lawsuit Andersen et al. Versus Stability AI, which Kelly McKernan, one of our panelists, is a plaintiff on. While many in the creative community and elsewhere are supportive of these efforts for artists to receive fair compensation, others, including the Electronic Frontier Foundation, worry about the legal approach being used in these efforts, specifically worrying that a too restrictive interpretation of copyright could end up being extremely dangerous for human creators and hamper research and innovation. In short, the conversation about AI, art, and copyright is complicated, and the conversations taking place about it in public, especially on the internet, have been heated and noisy. So heated and noisy that it can be hard to engage with. And that's why we're so grateful to have a chance today to be in person together and to get to slow down for the next hour or so and really listen to and engage with these four brilliant panelists and their unique perspectives on this thorny subject. So let me introduce them briefly. Kat Walsh is the general counsel at Creative Commons. A longtime open knowledge advocate, she was at Creative Commons as a co-author of version 4 of the Creative Commons license suite in 2012 to 2015, and returned to Creative Commons in 2021. She was previously chair of the Wikimedia Foundation and a board member of the Free Software Foundation. And she has also worked in library policy, technology startups, online community management, and as a classical musician. Kelly McKernan is an independent artist based in Nashville, Tennessee. They create original watercolor and acryla gouache paintings for galleries, commissions, and their online store. They are also a professor of illustration at Nosy College of Art. And as I mentioned earlier, since early 2023, Kelly has been advocating for artist rights as part of the historic class action lawsuit Andersen et al. Versus Stability AI. Takiyah Ward is a multidisciplinary Seattle-born creative who has explored her talents in a number of ways over the years, from custom sneakers and clothing to murals and art activations to media and storytelling. She also recently founded the Resole 206, Seattle's first dry cleaner for sneakers. Finally, Geoffrey Turnovsky is associate professor of French here at UW, as well as co-director of the Textual Studies program and one of the co-leads of our AI Creativity in the Humanities Research Cluster. He specializes in the cultural history of early modern France, emphasizing the history of print, authorship, reading, and copyright. His book, Reading Typographically, Immersed in Print in Early Modern France, will appear this June. Very exciting. So the plan for today is that each panelist is going to give a short presentation, and then we'll move into a roundtable discussion, and finally we'll open it up for Q&A with the audience. So start thinking of your questions now. And if you don't have time to ask your question, don't worry, because there's going to be a reception in the Galleria following the event, so we can continue the conversation outside at that time. Lastly, before I turn it over to our first speaker, Kat, I just wanted to thank our sponsors for this event, the Simpson Center for the Humanities, the Tech Policy Lab, and Society and Technology at the University of Washington. This event also would not have been possible without the hard work and planning of some specific people. Huge thanks to Caitlin Palo, Yasi Nargi, Monica Shangle-Jones, and Alex Bolton, and Lenny, I think, who did all of the microphone work. So without further ado, let's kick things off. Please join me in welcoming Kat Walsh.
Great, thank you for having me. So I'm the General Counsel at Creative Commons. Most people know it for its suite of copyright licenses. Our primary mission is that we're an international nonprofit organization that intends to empower people to grow and sustain a thriving commons of shared knowledge and culture. And we are best known for the suite of licenses which function internationally to allow people to share their works with the world under a few different sets of conditions. So I'm going to start by talking about what copyright is and what it is and isn't good for, especially in the context of AI. So I'm just going to ask in the audience, like, how many of you are fairly familiar with copyright already? Like, so lots of kind of wavy hands. I think that's probably appropriate. In general, like, copyright involves a lot of kind of wavy-handed understandings, and a lot of things are not clear, especially as you'll probably see later in the conversation. Lots of things are not quite black and white. And like, lots of things are not quite black and white and depend on judgment calls, which is part of what makes it difficult whenever new technologies arise. But whenever you create a creative work, where creative means not just the arts like paintings and novels, but also works of scholarship, blog entries, nearly anything you think of as having an author, it's under copyright. And what that means is once it's been created without doing anything special, the author automatically has the exclusive right to make copies of the work, which means reproducing it, performing it, displaying it, even making translations and remixes for a duration of the author's life plus 70 years. And this set of rights is intended to create a trade-off that makes it economically possible to be an author. In the US, this is based in the Constitution, which allows for exclusive rights to promote the progress of science and the useful arts. But because copyright creates such a tremendous restriction on speech, US copyright law has some exceptions and limitations, what's usually referred to as fair use. In these cases, copies are legally permitted in order to allow for speech and commentary, or because the way a work is being used is sufficiently different from what the work is published for. So if you want to criticize or review a work, you can copy that work to the extent necessary to talk about it. Or if you're teaching about a work, you can use it to teach about. Or if, for example, you're a search engine, where in order to function, you need to make copies of a work in order to let people find what they're searching for, you're using a work in what is called a transformative use, which is also considered a fair use under US law. Copyright law also protects the expression of an idea or piece of knowledge, but not the underlying idea itself. And it doesn't protect facts about the world, which can't be copyrighted to any single person. So, for example, if you're inspired by a piece of art and you want to create something in the same style, your use is usually not going to require a license from the author of that work if you're just making something in the same style, unless you're actually copying something that author did. Or if you read a textbook that contains facts about the world, those facts themselves are in the public domain. You're allowed to use them in your own work, you're allowed to copy them freely, but the specific way the author wrote about them may be copyrighted and you're not allowed to copy it without permission. Unlike many areas of law, copyright law is pretty similar all over the world. Almost all countries are signatories to an international treaty that sets some standards for what's covered and when. And this is unlike many other areas of law, such as like contract law and tort law. Copyright is internationally harmonized, which was done before the advent of the internet, but has turned out to be particularly valuable when works that are published online are now available everywhere in the world at once. It's nearly impossible to put geographical boundaries on copyrighted works in the digital age. Some of the main differences between countries are in what kinds of limitations and exceptions exist and how clearly they're defined. For example, in the US, fair use has a few principles that are set down. A lot of it is made by the judge's discretion in court cases. In other countries, a lot of them are more strictly prescribed, with only certain areas that qualify for fair use and others that don't, even if something would be under those exceptions and limitations in different countries. And I have not advanced my slides. Here's the next one. But for a lot of people, when they create the work, they want to share it in ways that doesn't need all of the exclusive right that copyright grants. Some people are only looking for credit attached to their work. Some people just don't want anyone else selling their works, but are happy for it to be distributed freely. What the Creative Commons licenses do is provide a standard set of licenses to let people share their works under certain conditions. Some allow for any kind of copying as long as the author's name is attached. Some allow non-commercial only, and some require any derivative work, such as remixes, to also be offered freely. The CC licensing approach works where copyright would ordinarily stop a work from being shared, and the author wants to make choices about how to share it more widely. But importantly, CC licenses don't override fair use. For example, if you have a non-commercial licensed work and someone is criticizing it in a commercial publication, they can still use the work under fair use, and they don't have to follow the license conditions. Because of our work with licensing, people have been coming to CC asking if we're going to create new license versions for AI. And our answer has been that we aren't. Our licenses are a great tool for one problem affecting sharing online. The default rules of copyright don't often match up with the ways that creators and reusers actually want to participate in sharing and seeing their work reused. But generative AI presents a different set of problems, and not all of those are ones that a tool designed around copyright can solve. And the main reason for this is that most of what's happening with AI doesn't depend on licensing. It's being done under these exceptions and limitations to copyright. CC has taken a minimalist position around copyright law, encouraging creators to think about which rights they need to keep and which they want to share, and encouraging limits on copyright in order to enable culture to flourish. This includes limitations and exceptions such as fair use. And generally, we consider the kind of use for training AI to fall under those limitations and exceptions. But the right to study and learn from a creative work, to get information from it and then use that information to create something new, shouldn't be something that a copyright holder gets to exclude under copyright. If we use copyright to block AI from this use, would we also block humans from making the same kind of use? But the motivation behind asking what CC is going to do is usually not a technical question about copyright. It's more of an expression about what a fear of what the future is going to mean for themselves, for people like them, and for human creativity in general. But our position at CC is that copyright isn't meant to solve every problem. Importantly, copyright is not a social safety net. Copyright isn't community governance. Copyright is not an ethical framework. We want copyright to be those things sometimes because we need those things in some form or another. And we look to copyright for them because that's one of the few tools that's available for individual action to address problems that come up with access to and use of creative works. But copyright is just about making copies, and we're wary of trying to shoehorn it in to address those other gaps which also affect the commons and creativity. We've been looking at other solutions that may come up in those places. One of the most promising options is preference signaling, a standardized way to express preferences around training AI that wouldn't be legally enforceable in the same way that a license is, but could be used to guide behavior in the same way that, for example, robots.txt addresses web scraping. Other possibilities include industry standard recommendations for best practices, codes of ethics, enforcement of rights of publicity and personality rights, community governance documents, and public regulation. We see generative AI as having both the potential to empower and the potential to harm. It's impossible to talk about it honestly without acknowledging both sides. We're excited about the potential for AI to enable new creation, to empower people to create by adding on to their own abilities, and to draw upon the knowledge and creativity that's more than any human could take in. It's helping scholars make connections in a variety of areas, helping with different kinds of scientific research and digital humanities. But at the same time, these tools should be used to empower creators and not betray them. We know that many problems exist, among them that artists' livelihoods are already precarious and the disruptive effect of AI will only make that worse. That the output of AI reflects a bias already existing in the world and can't overcome it, but can even amplify it. That the way these systems ingest and transform works are at odds with creators' intuitions about giving credit and acknowledging the past, and that works from these systems are missing both the context that they came from and any way to cite their sources. So we want a future where technology works for us and with us, and where we have control of our own futures, rather than just a few parties having exclusive control of them. Disruptive technologies have long enabled creation and sharing, even as they demand social adaptation to deal with their effects. But we need to make the power of these technologies work for us. How we do that is a work in progress, one that doesn't necessarily depend on copyright, and one I look forward to discussing.
It's the slides.
There we are. Hi, that's me. I'm Kelly. Excited to be here. Thanks for including me in this conversation. The first part of my presentation is going to be a little bit about me and my art that I've made my career for the last 15 or so years. And the second part is going to talk about what happened when I discovered my art had been trained on. So to begin, a little bit more about me. Again, I'm non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. I'm from Nashville. I've been a professional artist for about 15 years. For a little over 10 of those, I was a full-time artist up until last year. I create paintings with watercolor and acryla gouache. You got it right. It's a weird word. And I work with galleries, I create commissions. I also work as an illustrator, freelance, and I create book covers, comic covers. I've made comics for Evanescence, still crazy and awesome. I make tarot cards, you name it. And I'm also an adjunct professor of illustration at Nosy College of Art. So I've got like a basket of skills, you could say. So just starting, we all artists, human artists, start somewhere. We start as children inspired by the world around us, and we feel this need to express what we're experiencing as we grow. All children are artists. I've spent, gosh, over 20 years teaching children, and I mean, their imaginations are incredible. So I kind of think we're all really born with the capability to experience life and then express that in really interesting, creative ways. I think that's just a really solid part of being human, right? So those were just some of my early work, some things I had made through high school. And moving on into college, I had decided to go to school for art. I originally wanted to be an art teacher, but then I was like, I really like painting. So I switched over to painting and did photography. I did a bunch of stuff, lots of mixed media things. Moving on, this is like around 2006, 2007. I'm starting to develop my style. And this is important because even though this work you see right now is not super like familiar with, my current style, but I did start in one place and moved my way here. My style has evolved over time with my experiences as a person and so on and so forth. So here I'm really exploring what I'm capable of, what I want to say. My themes start to, become recognizable. I'm dealing with, I'm dealing with mental illness in these pieces. I'm dealing with idealism. I'm dealing with a lot of things that, an early 20s person is trying to figure out how to express. That work continues to evolve. This is about 2010. I've graduated already with my degree, and I started off running with a full-time plate full of gallery shows, solo show, all kinds of things. I hit the ground running when I graduated. I was very, very determined to make a living at this. So I committed 120% because it turns out that's the only way it works. You got to commit. So this work here is watercolor. I've already moved away from the mixed media a bit, and I'm developing a more consistent style. Again, so important because I have put my lifeblood into developing these pieces over these years. So this is about 2012. I've been able to take my career full time. I'm working with galleries even more. I'm developing those themes a little more succinctly. And you can really see in this part of my development that I have a much better idea of what I'm trying to say and express. And my career is doing really well by this point. This is about 2015. I'm making a full-time living, but I go through some turbulent life changes, and I don't need to go into detail, but I left a really bad situation and then my artwork responded. And this is important because that is such a big part of being a human artist, a creator, is that we go through things and it changes how we express ourselves. And this is my language. This is the language that I speak. I continue to develop this work. This is about 2018. I'm using my work to heal very purposefully. That second top left piece is all about grief. The one on the right is all about, reaching for the cosmos while staying grounded to reality. So I'm touching on some, again, very human themes, very important things to, my journey, but also I believe others can look at my work and relate to it. So my work continues to transform. Guess what? I went through another major life change and here we are, more colorful stuff. And this is kind of where my work is now. Currently, this is within just the last couple of years. So that's just a little bit of the work that I've created over the last 15 years or so. And it's hard to look at this image because this is over 50, not quite 50, but over 50 of my paintings in May of 2022 were scraped and put into the Lion 5B database, which is a database of 5 billion images with text pairings scraped from across the internet. I didn't give my consent. No one reached out to ask me how I felt about this. No compensation, no credit. And I certainly had no choice in which pieces ended up in that database. Many of those were from Pinterest, and I didn't even upload that stuff. So I just want to get across the point before I move on to the second part of my presentation, just how much of my life, this is my life. This is everything I am. These pieces I've made, violated. So I began to notice early versions of this. The image on the very left was a very, very early AI generation of my style on top of these landscape images that were coming out. When I first saw that, I wasn't concerned. I was like, oh, that's cute. Like, doesn't look like my art at all, but also kind of weird. Why me? And at this point, I'm kind of realizing that AI generated art is right around the corner. And I'm kind of excited because I love technology. I have been thinking about the possibilities for AI generated algorithms and how I could use that for my art. I imagined being able to put, let's say, all those 50 paintings into a database and look at what kind of patterns show up, what kind of things that maybe things that the algorithm is able to see in my art that I don't see myself. I thought that was really exciting, but I wasn't going to share that with anybody. It was just supposed to be for me. That didn't happen. So the middle image is another early version of some of the work, some of the images that were coming out based on my art. Later on, about a year later, at the end of 2023, that in the middle image, the top right replaced my authentic artwork in a Google search. And I called it. I knew that was going to happen. And then the right image is another example of some very early versions. Now, they don't look specifically like my work. I don't think I'd even make these on my own. Like, I think they're really sloppy, but I can see the influence, and it's very like, oh, it feels so gross. Here's another example. On the left are a bunch of images generated with this prompt, and you can tell which images it's pulling from. I can see exactly which images they were, so I put those up on the right. It gets more sophisticated. This is probably about late 2022 at this point. Midjourney had become extremely popular. Myself and other artists were like, hey, did anyone ask you? Did anybody, like, what's going on here? And we all kind of discover at the same time that, oh no, they didn't ask any artist at all what we thought of our work being taken and turned into this. This was the point where at the end of 2023, I was asked if I wanted to join a class action lawsuit of artists taking on some of the most egregious companies exploiting the work of unpaid artists, including me. What you see there on the left is from our most recent, amended complaint, where we went from about a 90-page complaint to like close to 500 pages with tons and tons of examples of, on the very top left is my original piece, and then variations of it created with an AI image generator. And then you can also see my piece, Liminal, very, very, very personal piece, probably my favorite painting of mine for several years. I have a new one. I'll show you guys later. And then seeing that image to the left of it is this bastardization of everything I put into that painting. That AI generated image has no idea why I made the one it's sourced from. It doesn't understand the life I've experienced up until that point that went into that painting. It doesn't have any context for its existence. And just looking at those two together, it really has me questioning, where does copyright come into this? Because this feels like plagiarism. This feels like an attack to me, a personal attack, and everything I've ever worked for. When I see that, it disgusts me. Another example, this is actually very recent, a couple of weeks ago. I can't tell if this person was just messing with me or they genuinely were like, let me make some fan art by putting your art into a plagiarism machine. I didn't like it, to say the least. And so that brings me to fighting back, not just with a lawsuit, with litigation. We're also fighting back in Congress in ways that we can, but we're also given tools like glaze and nightshade. Up here is an example of how nightshade works. If you haven't heard about this, it's developed out of the University of Chicago. And basically, you upload your artwork, and there is a filter put on top that basically, when the image is scraped, it will be read as not just as something different, but it will also go back and poison the model it's been ingested to. And so instead of putting out images that look like the scraped image, it puts out different things, but not just that, it also infects the rest of the model. It's incredibly exciting. So we have tools like that, tools like glaze, which basically confuses a model based on style. So one is one fights back and the other one is protective. So, we've got our shield and our sword for now. And then also public pushback has been extremely effective. I don't know if you guys has noticed, but over the last year and a half or so, people are like really tired of AI art. Like they think it is ugly, and thank goodness. But there's a lot of public pushback. There are companies like Disney who try to, for example, there was a show last year called Secret Invasion, where the intro was created entirely with Midjourney. And everyone I know is upset about that because, like, wait a minute, that's like my dream job, and now some like prompt jockey has it. What's going on? So all of my peers, including myself, are just like, well, how are we supposed to compete with this? How are we supposed to fight, this violation, not just replacing our work on the internet just by sheer volume, but we're also being displaced by this. We're losing work so quickly. Many artists, many artists, including myself, are no longer making a living. And let me say that again. After 10 years of my dream job that I've worked my entire life for, a job that I love and brings me so much joy, I am not making a living anymore. I lost a third of my income last year to AI. And you can speak to many artists who are saying exactly the same. This is why I'm an adjunct professor of illustration now. And, I love it. I'm very lucky. But, there's about 9 months there where I could not make ends meet, and I'm a single mom. So it's a big deal to be in this position. So I created this work called Artifact, because what do artists do? We respond, we critique, we soak up a culture around us, and we formulate responses, and we create. And so this is what I did after this experience, about a year and a half of this existential threat. I created this piece called Artifact. The purpose of it is to show where we come from and where we are going if we don't do something. The top half of the painting is, excuse me, the muse, the creator, the artist, the identity, the very human part of us that has to express ourselves. And everybody's creative in one way or another. You're going through something, you have this need, you have to express yourself. For artists like me, I have no choice but to make stuff like this. It's just how my brain works. And I will be doing this for the rest of my life. But so we have the muse, the creator, pulling from herself, literally making the beauty around her with her own body. And then the bottom is what you have a generative AI, is this distorted, disfigured amalgamation of what is supposed to be human, but instead it's 6-fingered creatures, and it looks pretty, but if you keep looking at it, it just gets weirder and makes less sense. Does that sound familiar? I put 3 weeks of my life into this. I didn't do anything else for that time. I just put everything I have into this painting, and I'm incredibly proud of it. I'm also excited to say it was one of the very first images to receive glaze and nightshade. So if this image is ever scraped, including this one on the screen, it has glaze on it and nightshade. It's poisoning those data sets, and I love it. So here's the main thing I want us to move forward with, is that this has already happened. You hear it all the time. There's no putting genie back in the bottle. However, we have an opportunity right now to push back and demand proper regulations and protections for artists. So one, we want consent. Our work was taken without permission and is used for commercial products for profit. Typically, if somebody wants to use my work for a product and sell it, they license it from me, and I make some money to pay my rent. We want compensation. Again, without human-made artwork, these image generators are completely worthless. And if you just put AI-generated images right back into a model, it basically kind of disintegrates. So human-made artwork is like the key, and they know this, and they don't want to pay us. We have to be paid for our labor. We need opt-in only. The burden of responsibility should not be on the artist to remove their artwork from endless generators and models that we're unaware of. We need transparency. We need to know what copyrighted work is in models. There are several companies who refuse to say what's in it. We need algorithmic disgorgement, and this is when everything is wiped clean. This includes situations where like the model has illicit and ill-gotten data, like CSAM material. And the FTC has ordered algorithm disgorgement before, so we know it can be done again. And we need copyright protection. Human artists should not have to compete with their own AI-generated derivatives of their work. I've literally been kicked out of my own like Google image search with someone's AI art based on my work. So if we don't take care of these things, this is what we have to look forward to. And that's what I'm here and fighting for. So thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. I should have introduced you before. That was very powerful. And next up, we have Takiyah Ward.
Yes, thank you for that, Kelly. You got me fired up seeing all of that. Yes. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Takiyah Ward. I am a Seattle born and raised artist, business owner, entrepreneur, and founder of the Vivid Matter Collective. We are the artists responsible for the Black Lives Matter street mural. And it was a piece of art that I helped create that rocketed, shipped my creative practice to a whole new level and got me to where I am today. Life, art, freedom. I actually have those words tattooed across my chest. This is what I live and breathe. It's my purpose for being on this earth. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to create with my mind. And I think it is so important for everyone to find ways to create. And I think it is a God-given right. It is our inherent, it's part of us. And so, everything that I do is trying to help people understand the importance of creativity. Humility, choice, and affirmation. The art of customizing came to me when I was a child. I am a customizer by nature. It's something that I've done since I was about 12 years old. Essentially what customizing is adding art to clothing. Specifically for me, it is sneakers. I hand paint, airbrush, bedazzle, you name it, I'll put it on a shoe. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love a three-dimensional canvas. I love the challenge of taking people's ideas and bringing them to life and making them wearable. And it's something that, again, has allowed me the opportunity to understand the world a little bit better and understand people's connections to their self-expression, things like that. This picture here was actually taken at one of my old studios. This particular piece, I hand painted the shoes and then I put them on and then I danced in them because I'm also a performer. It's another one of the things that I do when I'm not painting. So yes, as I said, my solo art practice kind of quantum leaped in 2020. Prior to that, I was a solo artist here in Seattle, barely making ends meet, working 9 to 5s, trying to figure it out, trying to find a way. And then, opportunity presented itself through a pretty gnarly event that we've all kind of experienced, which was the pandemic, subsequently followed by, a lot of civil unrest and protests in the streets of Seattle and across the world. Some friends of mine decided to get together and activate through art. What we ended up doing was organizing the Black Lives Matter street mural, which you see in the top right corner. That is myself and the members of Vivid Matter Collective painting the mural June 2020. In the midst of Chop Chas protest. So I'm sure you're aware there was a lot of cameras, there was a lot of activation, a lot of people, and a lot of eyes on what we were doing. We had no idea that mural would go viral or be seen around the world, and it actually was, and it really put a spotlight on, I think, what we do as artists, what we do when it comes to public interest and creativity and how art feeds us in a very, intense way. I can remember in 2020, when the city shut down and every business was boarded up, the streets are empty, there's no cars, there's nothing going on, people are not sure what's going to happen. But artists were the first people to activate those streets. You saw murals happening at various businesses and storefronts. And I feel like that activation really gave humanity hope. It helped us to know that we would get out of this, we would get through this, and there'd be something on the other side. And so I've been a champion of artists and artists' rights ever since, trying to help people understand, institutions, governments alike, the importance of art, the importance of creativity, and the importance of the art sector, and why it needs to be continually funded, why funding is important, why the starving artist trope can be perpetuated by these systems and institutions. And so this, again, this one mural put me in a place where I'm at tables with, you know, our governors, our city council members, our mayor, things of that nature. So yeah, it's been a pretty wild ride. One of the other things that ended up happening with that mural, the founding of the Vivid Matter Collective. We are the artists, again, responsible for the mural. We've been supporting each other ever since. We formed this collective, again, as a support group, and we help each other get materials. We help each other with skill sharing and workshops. And if you need a hand on a mural you're working on, whatever the case may be, we're there for each other. We ended up having to make that support group into a business, because we also had issues with plagiarism and copyright infringement on the mural. Subsequently after, of course, there's drones everywhere, there's people taking pictures, media, that sort of thing. And we had some people that were definitely trying to profit off of our art. And that, again, sort of led to us formulating this group and helping each other to protect what we had made. Some of the other things that I've done since then, I hosted a show with Converge Media, which is a Black media company here in Seattle, called Art of the Matter. It was a by, for, and about artists conversation show, which spoke to the artist perspective, given that time that we were in. Obviously, post 2020, art and public art has also seen a boom here in Seattle and around the world. Everybody wants a mural. Everybody wants to have art plans part of their developments and projects and things like that. And so it became, you know, understood and also important, I think, for me, having my perspective to, again, create an opportunity for artists to be self-sufficient and to create longevity from these projects and not have them be a situation of where it's just a one and done. We're trying to find longevity. We're trying to understand how art can be integrated into these various systems and maintained in that way. And one of the other things I've also done most recently is open my very first brick and mortar, which is the Resole 206. We are Seattle's first dry cleaner for sneakers. We specialize in cleaning, restoring, and customizing your favorite footwear. And to be able to create a space around what I love is just literally a dream come true. I actually came from there. Before I got here, I got paint on my hands right now because I was working on some custom shoes. So to have a space, again, to create, to do the things that I love, but also to share that creativity in that particular art form, which I'm sure, you know, some people would consider incredibly niche, but of course, being a part of that industry, I understand just how big it is and how big it will be. But one of the things that we also come across in sneaker customizing is the copyright conversation, the infringement conversation, because of course we are using Nikes, Adidas, Jordans, things like that, which are publicly branded, you know, products to create our own art and of course profit off of that. So you will see there are some situations actually currently where Nike is actually suing some makers because they believe that their work is infringing on their product. So yeah, we're also seeing it in the sneaker customizing world too, where it's just like, you know, big guys, you know, coming down on the little guys, that kind of thing. But again, having the space to help people understand their creativity. We also help people understand the entrepreneur side of this as well. I come from a business background. My mom is actually in intellectual property law, and she taught us from a very young age the importance of our intellectual property and what it means to protect it. And so that's something that I think has allowed me to get to a particular point in my art career where, you know, when I see a contract, I know what I'm looking at and I know how to protect what I'm doing. And I teach that, I share that with, you know, the various youth and people that come into my shop. We host workshops there and events catered towards sneaker culture, but we also have a focus on business and entrepreneurship and understanding how to protect what you make, and also understanding how to prevent any sort of infringements and things like that when working with large brands. And yeah, a little quote that I have here: everything in existence is birthed from creativity. It's just my personal belief. The creative sector is what keeps the world turning, humans thinking critically and bringing ideas to life. Obviously, AI, the bulk of the conversation that we're having here today, was created by people, you know, so we have to understand that, I think, as well. And I think it's important with this conversation to examine that fact. This is something that came from human minds, and it also needs to be integrated in how it evolves. We think about the general public, we think about people who have an inherent sort of understanding of these types of things. Obviously, you all here are very smart and learned individuals. You have a certain knack for understanding things, but the general public might not have that, right? And so if they're having things introduced to them, through their phones or whatever means, we also have to be conscious and aware of the impacts of that on culture, impacts of that on people's work and people's creativity. And so that is what I'm here for, championing the real artists. So thank you.
Thank you, Takiyah. And lastly, we have Jeff Turnovsky.
Thank you, Melanie. So I think my role here is to provide a little bit of historical context for current debates around intellectual property and really copyright specifically. And I think some of these current debates encapsulate many of the discontinuities and convolutions of this history. So I'm going to go through that quickly and then talk at the end a little bit about, the implications of the digital, at least pointing in the direction of, I think, what will be our discussion after. And yes, I do not have slides, so I'll talk through this. So copyright takes shape in the 18th century, emerges out of and reconfigures an older set of licensing practices and regulations that sought to provide some kind of order to commercial publishing, specifically to regulate the practice of piracy. Modern copyright emerges in the 18th century as these debates about regulation shift away from an older language of privilege, which referred to the temporary favor that would be granted to printers and publishers by authorities, to this new Enlightenment language of property and rights. And this is language that will also put the author, who had been peripheral in this older system of regulation of the book trade, at the center. I mean, the author's work and ingenuity will be defined in this moment as the source of those rights. So the 18th century debates about copyright end up being debates about what kind of property this regulation reflects. I mean, is it conventional property rooted in the author's labor and, equivalent to a house that one might buy or build? Or is it something else, an exclusivity reflecting not property rights so much as a kind of social consensus that the state was better off if it granted incentives to authors to produce works and to publishers to print them, with the understanding that it was beneficial to society to have as many useful works as possible and for access to those works to be as easy and as unproblematic as possible. But these incentives were seen in this perspective really more as tools than anything else, kind of meant to serve the public good. So copyright laws, they're first enacted in the 18th century, beginning in England in the early 18th century, then the Copyright Act in 1790 in the US, revolutionary laws in France in 1793, integrated both aspects of both of these arguments for and against copyright as property, elevating on the one hand the author, as a source of the value represented in copyright, who then has, of course, a deep claim to it, kind of a primary claim to it. But on the other, also advancing a view that the most important thing was the provision of works for a public. And so, in this sense, these laws were compromises with the balance, I think initially we could say, tilted towards the public. In England, the Statute of Anne, which was this early 18th century law, sometimes seen as the first copyright law, was enacted, I quote, for the encouragement of learning. And this language was taken up almost verbatim by the 1790 Copyright Act in the US. The language of the Copyright Clause, which Kat referred to earlier in Article 1 of the Constitution, reads, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. So you have an emphasis here on progress and utility, promoting it, and also on the word limited. The intellectual property of authors existed in as much as this served the public. I mean, it didn't really exist outside of that framework, which is why it could be limited. And this is a language you'll see today still. I mean, it continues. I mean, it sort of shapes the debates in the 18th century and these early forms of legislation. It runs today through kind of legal opinion through the 19th into the 21st century. It's the language of the US Copyright Office. I mean, this discourse is still there. But I wanted to talk quickly also about what happens next, which I think doesn't have actually a lot to do with the debates of the 18th century, nor with some of these, some of the discourses that still exist. And it's really the advent of what, Max Horkheimer and Theodore Adorno would call the culture industry. You get the rise of large publishing and media companies with, increasingly massive stakes in copyright. The rise of copyright is a larger and larger part of national economies. I think today copyright industries account for almost 8% of the US economy. I mean, something that, would have been infinitesimal, unmeasurable in the 18th century. So what do we see? We see this big expansion in copyright term through the 19th century. The original 1793 legislation in France set copyright term at life of the author plus 10 years. In the US, legislators adopted the terms of this earlier English law, the Statute of Anne. They set it initially at 14 years with the possibility of a 14-year renewal, which meant that an author could, live to see their works fall into the public domain, which is interesting to contemplate. And even that's understating things, since the vast majority, there are also lots of hurdles to acquiring copyright protection, because you had to register it, and the registration process was fairly onerous, such that, in the first 10 years or so, I think only about 500 titles out of 13,000 published in the US after this initial copyright law actually were copyrighted, in that they were registered with the appropriate offices. Copyright term was then progressively lengthened between the 1790s and then 1998, which was the last big revision to copyright, which extended copyright term to, as Kat had said, life of the author plus 70 years for authored works, but 95 years for, I think what sometimes gets called institutional authorship, works for hire. I mean, copyright that is initially held, from a work's creation by a company, for example. I think two implications of this are worth spelling out. One is that the balance between a creator's private interest and the public interest, which was really kind of part of the initial series of legislations and initially favored the public, somewhat, shifts pretty starkly towards the author, to the point where I think when we talk about copyright today, we often forget that initially it was meant to encompass the public's interest as well. And two, this changes the nature of the public domain. I mean, the public domain is as much the creation of copyright law as the limited nature of copyright, the limited rights defined by copyright term. I mean, the public domain is this repository of works to which no one can claim copyright. They're in essence kind of owned by the public. Of course, what does lengthening copyright term do, to 100 years? It means that the public domain becomes a repository of historical works. It's not the place one would go for progress in science or utility or learning, as was initially stipulated in the Constitution, or still is stipulated in the Constitution. So, this is where we are now. And what strikes me in current debates is the extent to which we've kind of internalized this reconfigured copyright, considered really almost exclusively in terms of the rights of authors, while forgetting where that view came from, which was not a, progressively renewed social commitment to the livelihoods of authors. I think there's an irony in all of this, which is that I don't think it's particularly clear that individual authors, and here, I'm coming out of a more of a textual perspective here, thinking about writers and authors of texts, writers trying to make a living writing and publishing works of various kinds. I don't know that you could say that they've historically benefited more from copyright than copyright has cost them. Writers who have sustained professional careers living off of the proceeds of copyright are really the exceptions. They're not the norm. As a compromise, by definition, copyright isn't cost-free. It likely reduces publication openings, and it certainly suppresses the availability of works. There's this interesting study from 2013, 2014 or so, and I think it just came out again in a sort of book version, that showed the suppressive effects of copyright. And this was based on a random sample of 2,000 plus, over 2,000 works that were randomly selected as in print on sale at Amazon. So random sample, 2,000 plus in print. They were then plotted, over time, sort of decade by decade, between 1800 and 2000. And, you'd expect this curve to kind of rise steadily from 1800 to the present. In other words, decade by decade, you'd expect books to become more and more available. There are more books published. generally people are more interested in more recent books than older books. But it's not what you see at all. You know, what you see is indeed that kind of slow rise starting from 1800, and then it hits the 1910s, 1920s, and it drops precipitously. 1910s, 1920s, you know, looking back from 2013, this is when, you know, the public domain begins or ends, depending on which direction you're looking at. But everything from then on is under copyright or presumed to be under copyright. And then this line stays very low, you know, throughout the 20th century, 60s, 70s, 80s. In this random sample of 2,000 plus titles, there are more titles from the 1880s than from the 1980s. And then the line shoots up very sharply from the 1990s to 2000. This reflects another dynamic, which is how quickly books go out of print. So you have these very starkly disconnected temporalities. On the one hand, a 100-year copyright term. And then on the other hand, a publishing market in which books only spend, you know, a few years in print. And the great majority of books are, you know, today in this category of being both under copyright and out of print, which is really kind of a purgatory. I mean, it's not a great place for them to be. And moreover, for many of these out of print books, there's no trace of who the copyright holder is. We don't even know. These are these famous orphan books, which even if you wanted to reprint or re-edit them, you couldn't because you wouldn't know who to go to ask to get the permission. So finally, a quick word about the digital, just to conclude here, so we have time for the discussion. I think the digital makes some of these less functional aspects of copyright more visible. I don't know if anyone really thought about orphan books until Google Books set about digitizing every book ever published. And we suddenly had the opportunity of trying to kind of go back to these early books from, you know, the early part of the 20th century and realizing we couldn't see them because they're under copyright and we don't even know who to ask to get the permission to publish them. From my vantage point, as a kind of, you know, cultural historian of print, the history of copyright is really fully embedded in the history of print. I mean, there's no copyright before print. No one during the 1,000+ years of preprint manuscript culture ever had the idea that we needed a kind of comprehensive legal system to ensure that text would only be copied, you know, with the permission of the author. Didn't occur to anybody for thousands of years. It takes form, you know, only within the context of print to regulate printing technology and the specific publishing systems that it gave rise to. At the center of which, you know, you have a very particular copying process, you know, concentrated, resource intensive. I mean, copyright was invented to control the behavior of printers, you know, who had businesses built around a printing press. How do you, you know, retrofit digital context into this regulatory framework? I'm not really sure anyone knows. I certainly don't think it's very easy. Digital publishing, I put that in quotes, you know, which is the uploading of resources into servers that respond to different kinds of requests, is completely different as a copying technology. It's a completely different thing. And I don't know that we have a consensus really about what digital publishing is. I mean, is digital publishing just putting something online? I don't know that sounds right necessarily. And I imagine many of the questions that will come up today have to do with what should and shouldn't be considered published when put online. I mean, certainly the questions coming up, I think, raise that problem. Print publication ultimately defines a very sharp disconnect between private and public, but the digital tends to blur those boundaries.
Truly, though, I'm really like processing. Thank you so much for all of those presentations. That was fantastic. So we're going to do a little discussion, then we're going to open it up for Q&A. I thought maybe we could start off pretty broad. I think you've all touched on this maybe in different ways, but, you know, throughout the entire human history of art and creativity, people have always borrowed and built on the ideas and works of others, whether that's through allusion or parody or quotation or inspiration. So how do you all feel, what do you think that AI technologies are doing today? How is that similar or different from this long human tradition? And maybe also, Jeff, as the historian, are there technologies in the past that have challenged these notions of human creativity in similar ways to what we're seeing today with AI?
I'll jump on this. It has me thinking about fan art. Because often fan art is supposed to be transformative, because if you're an artist just copying something, and changing something very small, it may just look derivative. But so I'm thinking about artists who create fan art, and it's done in the spirit of celebrating and honoring the original subject matter, the intellectual property. So, for example, I have made several paintings inspired by the films of Guillermo del Toro. And I bring him up as an example because he's actually very supportive of the independent artist community. He celebrates and uplifts artists who create work based on his works. But the difference is that none of these artists are creating works that compete with his works. And that's a really important point I want to make here, is that the AI images that are generated based on, say, my work, those are competing in the very same space that my work is. And so that's like resulted in artists like me losing a huge chunk of income, because somebody, instead of hiring me, can just go type in my name and create something that's good enough. And we all know good enough is like the basis. So I just wanted to bring that point out.
I'd like to add to that. I think given that sort of fan art angle in the interpretations of someone's work and original work, I think about some of the stuff that I've seen. Being a sneaker customizer, one of the things that's really important to me is the idea of one-of-one. And so if a customer asks me to make a shoe with a SpongeBob character on it, right, that obviously belongs to someone else, right? And so what I'm going to try to do is take that piece of art that someone else owns and add to it, and add that personal touch, add that element of evolution, which says that, yes, I'm inspired by this, but I'm also adding me into it as well. And again, to that, the second point that you made about the monetization of it, it's like, if you think about AI, the software is not interested in money, right? The software is not trying to make money. The people who run the software are the ones who stand to gain that monetization that is taken away from that other artist. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, talk about my own background. So my undergrad degree is in music, and I'm still a composer. And like the way that you learn to do, like I think music in any kind of art is like you start out by copying the things that you love, and eventually like you learn to become yourself. And but I actually do think there's an element of competition. Like if I could be, Oliver Arnold's, but better, like I would definitely do that. And I've definitely learned my own techniques from some of his work. The way you were successful in music school was just to take in as much as you could, and then like learn from that and be able to develop your style. And like, if I could have taken in 1 billion works the way that the AI systems, like, I feel like I would probably be a better musician. I know I don't think Jeff brought it up in his remarks, but something that I've read before is also that the conception of the author as like a solitary author came up in conjunction with like the rise of copyright and authors' rights. So like there's like, and I think because people need to like get the economic rights with their work to be able to make a living, like that conception of like, okay, who is an author, like as a separate thing from just like, oh, I'm drawing on the collective like knowledge of humanity. Like I am one of the authors of this work, but not like the person. Like that became more important to distinguish, and it kind of, I think it almost like, it's almost like has distorted the way that we think about it as like, oh, this work has this author versus like here is the lineage of works that it drew on, and like here's what I added to it.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. I mean, I think in a way, it's, thinking about the portion of this question that was for me, which was the, other technologies in the past that have challenged our notions of human creativity. I mean, other technologies, of course, challenge our notions about all sorts of things. I mean, that's constantly happening. The specific part of creativity is the tricky one, because I mean, in a way, it introduces the idea of creativity, these new technologies. I mean, thinking particularly about print and sort of, the kinds of publishing practices that developed around it, and these models of authorship that sort of generated within that world, these individuals who are then seen as kind of these creative sources for certain kinds of expressions, models that hadn't really existed prior to that. So it's not that it disrupts notions of creativity, kind of in that case with print, it sort of introduces the idea. Now, of course, being challenged in new ways by the digital.
Yeah, I think in terms of sort of the possibilities of AI expanding human creativity, I also wanted to ask about how artists or people are using AI to make art. I've been struck in the last year, I've talked to a few artists who are using AI in their work, but in ways that have surprised me. So I talked to one woman who's a painter and doesn't use AI to make her paintings, but uses a ChatGPT to help her write an artist statement. So I was wondering to hear from you all, maybe especially Kelly and Takiyah, but Kat, you're also a musician. Have you used AI in your work? Do you know other artists who are using AI in their work? And what do you think about those decisions that people are making when they're incorporating AI into their practice in some way?
I'll jump in. I have a friend named Kirsten Zuring. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I only see it on the internet, but starts with a Z. Ask me later. She's incredible. She's been working with generative AI for many years, actually developing her own internal model based on thousands of images that she has created, and it has just blossomed into this very this like empire of her own works, and I can see just how the way she's developed it is so creative and so thoughtful, and with intention and story building. And I love the way that she's doing it because she's not taking other pieces of other people's art to make this. It's only her own. And I think that is thrilling. I have played around with image generators, and it didn't feel good. It didn't give me that spark of, joy that I feel when I make something, especially if I spend weeks and then I complete it and I'm like, oh, wow, that felt great. Didn't feel that at all. As far as myself using it in the future, when it is more ethically built and when there are protections for artists and regulations so that I don't feel like I'm infringing on the rights of my peers, until then, I'm not interested.
Yep, I think that's a fair assessment. I have used AI. I actually use Canva to make my PowerPoint presentation, and it does have AI integrations. And I think on a broader scope, for me, I probably would fall in the category of like the ChatGPT, the more mundane parts of creating and process is what I feel comfortable currently using AI for. So if I need to make an artist statement, or if I need to put together a pitch for a proposal, those sorts of things, I think there is something to be said about the language aspect of it that just allows for that general coverage, right? Whereas when we're talking about something specific, when we're talking about creativity and we're talking about art, I definitely choose to steer away from it, because I do think that there are some, there's room for things as far as the protection is concerned. I think I agree with you, Kelly. And I do have some friends that we've been having this conversation, amongst several artists that I work with about AI, about things like Midjourney and how they're being used, what they're actually generating. Also, it's like, again, do you enjoy what this machine is generating? And personally, I think that there's a lot of room for other stuff, but there's also something to be said about something being able to get a thing out of your mind and onto something else. Because I find, for me personally, my creative practice and just the way that my mind works, I can see things that I know will never exist. You have dreams, you have daydreams, nightmares, whatever, ideas. I'm a very visual person. I take in and I put out very visually. And so sometimes I'll see something and I'll want to make something, and I'll think of something that I know probably will never exist, but also just to have a thing that is even attempting to get that out of my mind and onto something else, I think is very beneficial. But when we get into the weeds of like that product being turned into something that can then be monetized or used against me or used in a way that prevents me from moving forward, then we're having a different conversation. So I do think that there is some possibility and some potential with AI, ChatGPT, things like that, visual generators. But I also think that there's a lot of protecting of the sanctity of creativity that still needs to happen too. And again, going back to that general public kind of aspect of it, I feel like the reasons why we're seeing so many AI tools on our phones and on the various platforms that we use, whether it be Facebook or Meta or Twitter, like everybody has an AI aspect to them now. But when you start introducing that type of technology to the general public, then we're in a space of where those protections and those securities are more difficult to sort of create. So
I also think there's a big difference in feeling between people who are just like asking the AI to like give them something and people who are using it as like a tool that they're working with. Like we've interviewed with people from Creative Commons who are using AI as part of their art. Like what I'm thinking of is an artist called Daniel Ambrosi who does like digital art, and I interviewed him and he talked about like using it as a collaborator, rather like he'd take what he would get and then like transform it into his own thing, rather than like just like okay, I ask it for flowers and it gives me flowers. Like he like uses it as like a tool rather than a, and I think that feels different to a lot of people than just like okay, give me something, you know, which is.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, and it's making me think about how we haven't talked a lot about whether you can copyright something that you've created with an AI tool. And so far, the U.S. Copyright Office, right, has said that you cannot.
Yeah, my friend Kristen that I mentioned has been one of the people trying to test the Copyright Office with how much something is made with AI versus how much of it's human. And so stay tuned, they're trying.
Yeah, like there's like I'm thinking of like there was a graphic artist Chris Castanova who's done like who's done like graphic novels basically with their own like, you know, story, their own like, you know, like they're like a lot of the elements of their own story, their own characters, but have used generative AI as like part of like it to create like background art and other aspects, and have tried to get that through the Copyright Office. But basically I think the Copyright Office has actually been pretty sensible about it so far, which is to say the parts that came like from the creative artists themselves are copyrightable, and the parts that came from like the generative AI system are not. As you as the reuser, if you're looking at a whole work together trying to parse that out, like maybe you can't. That's another one of those wavy hands aspect of copyright. But yeah, like I think it has been sensible to say like the parts that the like an artist creates are copyrightable, and the parts that are like generated are not, is a reasonable way to go forward. But like, yeah, how are you as the reuser supposed to know? Like it's basically impossible unless they've been super transparent about their process.
And I personally don't want to consume something that's made in part with generative AI, especially if it's a comic book that looks like a knockoff of Zendaya.
Mm-hmm. Although it seems like kind of like Takiyah was saying, you know, it's getting tricky now where like Photoshop has AI integrated or Canva has AI integrated, and it's increasingly difficult to sort of draw the line. Okay, I have one more quick question before we turn it over to the audience. So maybe we could do it rapid fire, even though this is kind of a tricky question, sort of a crystal ball question. We've already sort of been getting into it, but what impact do you think AI is going to have on art and creativity in the next 10, 20, or 50 years? And if you think the impacts are going to be negative, what do you think we can do to try to mitigate those harms, whether as everyday citizens or researchers? Kelly, you were talking about Glaze, which I think is a really cool and exciting project. And one thing it sounds like I've been taking from these presentations, at least from Kat and Jeff, is maybe copyright is not our only tool for trying to mitigate harms. So yeah, I'm wondering for your rapid fire take on this.
Okay, rapid fire. So now that I'm teaching, I talk to my students a lot about the future of their careers, and I tell them honestly that like I'm pretty anxious, and that is why I'm fighting so hard right now, because I believe this is the only opportunity we're going to have. And I tell them, like, you know, for now, lean into traditional media, lean into, you know, the looks, make it look like you made it with your hands. And I know I'm kind of hoping that in the future, especially in the art world, we might see a shift into more like clearly human-made pieces, and that's probably going to develop quite a lot. But I feel really bad for the digital artists whose work, you know, was scraped and now looks AI generated through no fault of their own. So it'll be really interesting to see just how art styles develop and respond to this.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's definitely going to be a doozy. I'm trying to keep as much of an eye as I can on how the industry is developing, and it's developing incredibly rapidly. I mean, I know that there's people that don't even know AI exists, while at the same time, this technology is making films and, you know, making shoes and engineering construction documents for buildings and things like that. So it's gotten to a point where, you know, the possibilities are already endless. And so I think what I hope is that more protections will be generated around human intelligence and creativity. I think that's probably the most important thing that we've all kind of spoken to today. It's like, you know, the capability of this technology is infinite. You know, and so what do we as human beings do with that understanding? And I think it's important for us to, again, protect that human intelligence and protect that human creativity, and, you know, create opportunities for artists and creatives to learn about AI and to use it collaboratively and use it in a way that is beneficial to their practice and not harmful or restrictive. You know, it's going to go where it's intended. You know, I think the fact that people know about it means that that work has already been done. You know, the fact that we are talking about it right now means that it's gotten to a point where it's here to stay. And so I hope that just humans are allowed to interact with and explore and examine this technology in a way that is human.
I don't know that I don't have a particularly good answer to this question because I have no idea. But I think it's, you know, need to be cautious about ascribing too much intentionality to AI. And you'd mentioned AI is not looking to make money. It's the people using AI. I think that works from the other side too. I mean, is AI plagiarizing, or the people asking AI to plagiarizing? You know, I mean, I don't know exactly how legally we sort of deal with that, but I mean, AI itself is a computer program. You know, it's a tool that's being used in particular ways, and it's going to shape the uses we make of it is of course going to shape the future of art and creativity and other things. But I mean, it's the larger social, commercial, sort of artistic and cultural systems that AI gets defined by that's going to answer this question.
Yeah, like I feel like the tool is here to stay. Like we're here talking about it because it's like fascinated the popular consciousness. Like we love it as a tool. Like even like as we are wrestling with the ethics of it, it's not the first time that a technology has completely disrupted an industry. And I feel like as a society, like we need to be better in that in all sectors, not just like the artistic sector, but like I feel like. Yeah, so I feel like law is a lot less powerful than social norms in general. Like law is basically the right to go to court about it, and social norms are what people do about it. And I think as like it becomes more clear, like what the social effects that people are going to adjust their behavior. Like maybe people will recognize that, like, hey, if people want to opt out of this, maybe you should let them opt out of it. Like if there are certain kinds of works maybe that shouldn't be trained on. And the technology is developing. Also, people are developing new training methods where it is like easier to exclude works or easier to use different sets, and like exploring what that means for the tools. So I hope to see like technology and social norms developing to make things seem more fair and equitable, and still allow the technology to develop for the uses it's good for.